My family put me in a nursing home because I was broke. But when I won the lottery, they all showed up with flowers and fake smiles, subscribed to the channel, and let me know where you're watching from. This is a story about betrayal, survival, and how sometimes the family you need ain't the one you were born into. The worst thing about hearing your children plan to throw you away isn't the betrayal. It's realizing it's been coming for years and you just didn't want to see it. The Magnolia Gardens is the most affordable option, Marcus said, his voice carrying through the door I was standing behind. My own son. The investment banker I put through college by working 2 jobs after his daddy got sick was comparison shopping for the cheapest place to dump me. It's a state facility, Danielle argued. My Harvard-educated attorney daughter, who I haven't seen in 3 months despite her living 20 minutes away. The reviews online are horrible. You want to pay for a private facility? Be my guest. That was James, my youngest, the doctor who couldn't be bothered to come check on me himself after my stroke. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was just bringing them coffee, my hands still a little shaky from the mild stroke I'd had 2 weeks ago. The doctor said I'd recover fully with some therapy and support. My children apparently decided that was too much to ask. Mom lost everything in that investment scheme, Marcus continued. She's got no savings left. My hand tightened on the doorframe. That scheme was his recommendation. He'd convinced me to invest my retirement fund after Robert died, promised he'd manage it himself. When it all disappeared, he just shrugged and said the market was unpredictable. None of us has room, Danielle said, like I was an oversized sofa instead of the woman who'd wiped her tears and taught her to stand tall when the white girls at her school bullied her. I pushed the door open then, the coffee cups rattling on the tray. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, all showing the same thing: inconvenience. I see y'all making plans for me, I said, setting down the tray with as much dignity as my trembling hands allowed. Mom, you shouldn't be carrying things, James said. Doctor voice activated. He hadn't bothered to use that voice when I called him after falling. We're just discussing options, Marcus said smoothly. You need specialized care after your stroke. What I need is my family, I said. We all have our own families now, Mother, Danielle replied, checking her watch. Our own responsibilities. I took care of your father for 15 years when he got sick, I reminded them. Worked full-time teaching, raised all of you, and never once complained. That was different, Marcus said dismissively. How? I demanded. You've always been too stubborn to live with any of us anyway, he snapped, finally showing his true colors. You'd drive us all crazy within a week. I looked at each of their faces, these strangers who came from my body. Where were the children I'd raised? The ones who made me Mother's Day cards and promised they'd always take care of me like I took care of them? When are you planning to take me to this Magnolia place? I asked quietly. They exchanged glances, and I knew then they'd already signed the papers. The intake appointment is Monday, James said, at least having the decency to look somewhat ashamed. In that moment, I felt something inside me harden. I'd spent my life being the one who understood, who forgave, who sacrificed. But standing there, watching my children plan to discard me like yesterday's trash, I realized that sometimes understanding isn't enough. Sometimes you have to fight back. Magnolia Gardens smelled like bleach, trying to cover death. That was my first thought when Marcus and Danielle dropped me off on a cold January morning. James couldn't make it. Emergency at the hospital, he claimed, just like he'd claimed for my last birthday and Christmas. This is temporary, Mom, Danielle said, not meeting my eyes as an aide wheeled in my belongings, all I had left in the world reduced to 2 suitcases. Just until you're stronger. Sure, baby, I said, knowing a lie when I heard one. The room was small, with 2 narrow beds separated by a thin curtain, mint green walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade, a window overlooking the parking lot. Mrs. Washington, this is your roommate, Mrs. Johnson, the aide said, gesturing to an elegant black woman sitting by the window. Ruby, the woman corrected. Ruby Johnson. And you must be Eleanor. My children stayed exactly 15 minutes. Marcus checked his watch 5 times. Danielle took a business call in the hallway. Neither hugged me goodbye. They coming back tomorrow? Ruby asked after they left. They said they would. The lie tasted bitter. Ruby hummed, seeing right through me. My son said the same thing 3 years ago. He lives in California now. That first night, I cried silently into my pillow, thinking about the home I'd lost, the one Robert and I had bought when James was still a baby, the garden I'd tended for 40 years. the neighbors who checked on me daily after my stroke. The next morning, I discovered what Magnolia Gardens really was. Understaffed, underfunded, with residents parked in front of a TV all day. Meals that couldn't pass for food. Call buttons that went unanswered for hours. The trick is to not need nothing, Ruby told me over breakfast, a gray substance they claimed was oatmeal. The minute you need something, you're in trouble. Weeks passed. My children's calls grew less frequent, their promised visits repeatedly canceled. Marcus's wife answered when I called during my grandson's birthday party. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "They're just cutting the cake. Can he call you back?" I heard laughter in the background, the sound of my family celebrating without me. "Don't worry about it," I said. "Just tell him Grandma loves him." When I hung up, Ruby was watching me, her eyes kind but knowing. "Hurts like hell, don't it? Like someone cutting out your heart with a butter knife," I admitted. "My son sent me a Christmas card with his dog on it," Ruby said. "Not him, not my grandkids, his dog." We laughed then, a bitter sound that turned somehow genuine. That night, I tried calling Danielle and James. Neither picked up. I left voicemails that were never returned. "How do you do it?" I asked Ruby later. "How do you wake up every day knowing your child threw you away?" Ruby straightened her shoulders, dignity in every line of her 81-year-old body. "By remembering I'm still here, still breathing, still got something to give this world." She reached over and took my hand. "And now I got someone to give it to." I squeezed her hand back, feeling something crack open inside me. Not just pain, but possibility. By April, Magnolia Gardens had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like a strange kind of community. Ruby became more than a roommate. She was my confidant, the sister I never had. Together with Walter Green and Gina Moretti, we formed what Walter jokingly called the Forgotten Four. "In my day," Walter said one afternoon as we sat in the small courtyard, "I fought segregation, marched with King, argued cases before judges who called me boy to my face." He held up his trembling hand, Parkinson's slowly claiming his body. "Now my grandkids act like I'm already dead because I shake too much at their fancy dinner parties." Gina nodded. "My Antonio, he built business from nothing after we come from Italy. When he die, my children say, 'Mama, you too sad in that big house alone.' They sell everything. His tools, my wedding china, pictures I cannot replace. Their stories echoed my own. I'd been the first black female professor in my university's English department, had published articles on civil rights literature that were still cited today. I'd marched, protested, pushed for change, then stepped back from academia to care for Robert and raise our children. None of that seemed to matter to my children now. "Professor Washington," a young voice interrupted our circle. Shanice Williams, one of the few caring nurses, was beaming at me. "I knew I recognized your name. You taught at Kennedy High when I was there. Your black literature class changed my life. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of my old self. You were in my class? Senior year, 2010. You gave me an A on my Toni Morrison paper and told me I could do better." She laughed. "You were right." After that, Shanice would stop by during her breaks. She showed me photos of my children's social media posts, lavish vacations, parties and homes I'd never been invited to, captions about living their best lives. "People only post what they want others to see," Shanice said kindly, seeing my expression. In late April, James finally visited. He stayed exactly 17 minutes, most spent taking a selfie with me for Instagram. "Look who I'm visiting. Family first," he captioned it, angling to keep the institutional setting out of frame. "We sold the house," he mentioned casually as he was leaving. "Got a good price. The house where I'd raised them, where Robert had died. The last piece of my old life." I nodded mechanically, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. That night, I started our little reading group. "If they think we're just waiting to die, they're wrong," I told my friends. "I taught literature for 40 years. Time to put that to use." When Shanice found us discussing Alice Walker passionately, she joined right in. "Y'all are the most alive people in this place," she said admiringly. Later, as Ruby and I prepared for bed, she studied me. "Something's changed in you, Eleanor. You got that look my mama used to get, like you plotting something." I smoothed my thin blanket, thinking about the family photos my children had forgotten to bring me, about the house they'd sold without asking, about all the promises broken. "Not plotting," I said finally, "just remembering who I used to be." Y'all ready for the weekly ritual? Walter's eyes twinkled as he rolled into our circle in the day room, his wheelchair handled with the same precision he once used in courtrooms. Ruby clapped her hands. It's lottery day. Every Wednesday, Walter's nephew Thomas would bring his uncle a special treat, 5 lottery tickets. One for Walter, one for Ruby, one for Gina, one for me, and one for luck. It's not about winning, Walter explained when he first included me in this tradition. It's about having something to hope for together, something outside these walls. Thomas, a gentleman in his 50s who never missed a week visiting his uncle, handed out the tickets. Regular numbers for everyone except Miss Eleanor, he said, giving me a bright blue ticket. Uncle Walter insisted on getting you a special Powerball ticket this week. Walter winked at me. Had a feeling about you, Eleanor. You've been talking about starting that foundation to help families keep their elderly at home. This one's for your dream. I tucked the ticket into my pocket, touched by his gesture. Later that evening, Shanice burst into our room during her night shift, eyes wide. Miss Eleanor, the Powerball numbers. We need to check your ticket. My hands trembled as I handed her the blue ticket. Her eyes darted between it and her phone. 4, 17, 23, 46, 58, and Powerball 12. She looked up, voice dropping to a whisper. Miss Eleanor, these are your numbers. What does that mean? I asked, my heart suddenly racing. It means you just won $45 million. The room spun. Ruby gripped my hand, keeping me anchored. Nobody can know, Walter said firmly when we gathered in his room later. Thomas still with us. Not yet. People go crazy around lottery winners, Thomas agreed. And lottery winners' names get published. Not anymore, Walter corrected. Georgia changed the law last year. Winners can remain anonymous now, but we need to move fast, get a trust set up. Thomas knew a specialized attorney. He handles big winnings, helps protect people's privacy. I can call him first thing tomorrow. The nursing home will have to know eventually, Shanice pointed out. For discharge purposes. I thought about what this meant. Freedom, security, choices I hadn't had in years. And yet, my children, I said quietly. Once word gets out, they'll come running, Ruby finished. Like vultures to fresh meat. Walter's eyes met mine, understanding flowing between us. That might not be a bad thing, Eleanor. Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ticket was locked in Thomas's safe at home, but its promise burned in my mind like a wildfire. Not just the money, though after years of pinching pennies, that was overwhelming enough. But the possibilities. You awake too? Ruby whispered across the dark room. How can I sleep? Everything's about to change. You scared? I considered the question carefully. No, I realized. For the first time since they brought me here, I'm not scared at all. Ruby's soft laughter floated through the darkness. Then they should be. Word travels fast in places like Magnolia Gardens. Despite our precautions, despite the trust Thomas's lawyer friend set up to claim the money anonymously, it took less than a week for the administrator to learn I'd be leaving for financial reasons. My congratulations, Mrs. Washington, she said. Her previously dismissive attitude transformed into honeyed respect. If there's anything we can do to make your remaining time with us more comfortable, the same things I've been asking for 6 months would be nice, I replied coolly. Working call buttons, edible food, staff who answer when residents need help. Her smile tightened. Of course, I never found out exactly how my children discovered my windfall. Maybe that administrator called them, maybe a social worker. All I know is that one sunny June morning, all 3 appeared at Magnolia Gardens for the first time since January. Marcus carrying roses, Danielle holding a designer gift bag, James with a box of fancy chocolates. Mom! Marcus embraced me like I was precious. You look wonderful. I stepped back, studying them, these strangers wearing my children's faces. Do I? Must be the luxury accommodations. They had the decency to look uncomfortable, glancing around at the peeling paint and worn furniture. We've been so worried, Danielle said. I've been swamped with this big case. Career-making. I nodded. Must be why you couldn't return my calls for 5 months. James jumped in. The hospital's been crazy, Mom. I've had back-to-back emergencies and... Save it, I interrupted, surprising all of us with my firmness. You're here now. That's what matters. Relief washed over their faces, their assumptions intact. Forgiving Mama, understanding Mama, never holds a grudge Mama. Little did they know how much I'd changed. They stayed for hours, talking over each other to tell me about their lives, their children, their achievements, all the stories they hadn't bothered sharing during my months of isolation. Not once did they mention the lottery, though their eyes kept drifting to the modest possessions in my half of the shared room, as if trying to spot evidence of newfound wealth. Ruby returned from physical therapy, and I introduced her. "Ruby's been my family these past months," I said pointedly. My children nodded politely, then immediately turned back to me. As we walked to the day room, Danielle whispered, "Should we be discussing your situation in front of your roommate?" "Ruby knows everything about me," I replied. "More than my own children do these days." In the day room, we joined Walter and Gina. I watched my children's discomfort around these elderly strangers, their barely concealed impatience. When Walter mentioned his legal background, Marcus perked up. "All business." "Corporate law?" he asked. "Civil rights," Walter replied. "I represented people who couldn't afford justice otherwise." Marcus's interest evaporated instantly. As they prepared to leave, making elaborate promises about returning soon, I noticed something odd. While Danielle was in the bathroom, I saw Richard, Marcus's husband, texting someone with a smirk on his face. When he caught me watching, he quickly pocketed his phone. "Everything okay?" I asked innocently. "Perfect," he replied too quickly. "Just perfect." After they left, Ruby squeezed my hand. "You know they didn't come to see you, right? They came to see the money." I nodded slowly. "Question is, what are they planning to do about it?" Walter, who'd been quietly observing all afternoon, pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I've been taking notes," he said, his old lawyer instincts kicking in. "And something doesn't add up with your children, Eleanor." "I noticed," I said, remembering Richard's secretive smile, "and I intend to find out what." July brought sweltering heat and increasingly frequent visits from my children. Each one found reasons to see me alone, their conversations carefully casual, yet probing about my plans. "You know you can trust me with anything, Mom," Marcus said during one such visit, his hand on mine. "I've always looked out for the family's financial interests." I smiled, thinking of my depleted retirement account. "Yes, you certainly have." Danielle took a different approach. "As an attorney, I'm concerned about predatory individuals who might take advantage of your situation," she said, voice professional. "You need proper legal protection." "How thoughtful," I replied. I hadn't considered that. James expressed exaggerated medical concerns. "Your blood pressure medication might need adjustment with all this stress," he suggested. "Maybe you should stay with one of us for monitoring." Walter's friend, Patricia Morrison, the attorney helping manage my trust, warned me this would happen. "Sudden wealth makes people targets, especially elderly people," she'd explained. "Even, perhaps especially, from family." By mid-July, my children orchestrated a family meeting at Magnolia Gardens. They arrived looking like a united front, something I hadn't seen in years. "We've been talking, Mom," Marcus began, assuming his natural role as spokesperson. "We think it's time for you to come home." "Home?" I repeated. "My home was sold. My home. Remember?" They exchanged glances. "We've purchased a property," Danielle explained. "A beautiful house with plenty of room for everyone. We could all live together, like a family should." "All of you? Together?" I asked, knowing how they barely tolerated each other at holidays. "It would be perfect," James added. "I could monitor your health, Danielle could handle any legal matters, and Marcus could advise on finances." The perfect trap, I thought, but smiled. How considerate. "When did you make these arrangements?" "We've been planning for weeks," Marcus said proudly. "It's all taken care of." Just like they'd taken care of putting me in Magnolia Gardens, without consulting me, without considering my wishes. Later that evening, Shanice knocked softly on my door. "Ms. Eleanor, can I show you something?" She handed me a manila envelope. Inside were printouts of my children's social media posts from the past 6 months. Vacation photos from Cancun and Europe, party pictures, expensive restaurant meals, posts dated during times they'd claimed to be too busy to visit. One photo stopped my heart. Danielle and Richard, Marcus's husband, on a yacht, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, the caption reading, "Perfect day with my favorite person." "I thought you should know who you're dealing with," Shanice said gently. I stared at the evidence of my children's lives without me and the apparent betrayal between them. "Thank you," I said, mind racing. "This changes everything." That night I met with Walter, Ruby, and Gina in our secret spot, the rarely used library. They want to lock me up in a gilded cage, I explained. Control everything. Classic conservatorship play, Walter nodded. I've seen it before. What are you going to do? Ruby asked. I straightened my shoulders. Something they'd never expect. By August, the trust had received the lottery funds, and I was officially a multimillionaire. The money itself felt surreal. Numbers on paper that Patricia assured me were real. What felt tangible was the power it gave me to make choices. My first choice shocked everyone. I've found a house, I announced to my children during one of their now regular visits. I'll be moving there next week. Their faces showed identical confusion. But we already bought the family house, Marcus protested. Your house, not mine, I corrected. This one is my choice. 5 bedrooms in historic Inman Park. 5 bedrooms? Danielle frowned. That's excessive for one person. Who said I'd be living alone? I smiled. Ruby, Walter, and Gina will be moving in with me. The stunned silence was worth every penny I'd paid for the house. Those people from here? James finally managed. My friends, I said firmly. The people who were there for me when I had nothing. But we're your family, Marcus insisted, anger creeping into his voice. You abandoned me, I replied calmly. They embraced me. There's a difference. They argued. Of course, tried guilt, concern, even thinly veiled threats about my mental capacity. But Patricia had ensured everything was legally airtight. And I've hired Shanice as my full-time nurse, I added. A precaution you should appreciate, James. The following week, I watched my friends' faces as they entered their new home, their real home, perhaps for the first time in years. Ruby ran her hand over the marble countertop in the kitchen, tears in her eyes. Walter rolled his wheelchair through wide hallways designed for accessibility. Gina stood in the garden, face turned to the sun. Is this real, Eleanor? Ruby whispered that first night, in her beautiful blue bedroom, her own space after years of institutional living. As real as we are, I promised. I established a weekly family dinner, inviting my children and grandchildren. Some weeks they came, some they didn't. My grandchildren, at least, seemed genuinely happy to reconnect. 16-year-old Zoe and 14-year-old Tyler, Marcus's children, visited most often, slowly rebuilding our relationship. Why haven't we seen you all these years, Grandma? Tyler asked one afternoon as we baked cookies together, something his father had never made time for. Sometimes adults make complicated choices, I answered carefully. But I'm here now. During these family gatherings, I watched, observed the tension between Marcus and his husband Richard, noticed how Danielle avoided Richard's eyes, yet somehow always ended up near him, saw James constantly checking his phone, jumping when it rang. They hiding something, Ruby commented after one such dinner. All of them. Yes, I agreed, and I intend to find out what. Walter looked up from his newspaper. Patricia mentioned an investigator she trusts. Michael something. Michael Turner, I nodded. I met with him yesterday. Even my friends looked surprised. You moving fast, Gina observed. I've lost too much time already, I said. And something tells me I need to know what I'm dealing with before they realize I'm not the same woman they abandoned in January. That night, I stood on my bedroom balcony, looking at the Atlanta skyline. For the first time in decades, I felt fully awake, aware, powerful. Whatever my children were hiding, whatever they were planning, they had no idea who they were up against. I'm making my will, I announced at our October family dinner, watching my children's expressions carefully. Patricia says it's important to get everything in order. The sudden alertness in their eyes was almost comical, like hunting dogs catching a scent. That's very responsible, Mom, Danielle said, lawyer voice activated. I'm happy to recommend some estate specialists from my firm. Patricia has it covered, I replied. But thank you. Who's handling your investments? Marcus asked, too casually. I know some excellent financial advisors. Actually, Danielle interrupted, Kevin Pearson would be perfect. He handles all our high-net-worth clients' portfolios. I'd love to meet him, I said, noting the quick glance between Danielle and Marcus. Kevin Pearson arrived at my home 2 days later, handsome, charming, and attentive in a way that screamed insincerity to my now skeptical eyes. Mrs. Washington, it's an absolute pleasure, he gushed, taking my hand. Danielle has told me so much about you. Fascinating, I replied, considering she barely spoke to me for 6 months. He recovered smoothly. Family relationships can be complicated, But what matters is reconnecting, don't you agree? For the next hour, Kevin outlined investment strategies, speaking slowly as if I might not understand. I played along, asking deliberately naive questions, watching him grow increasingly confident. After he left, Walter wheeled himself into my study, frowning. "I don't trust that man." "Nor should you," I agreed. "There's something off about him." In my courtroom days, I saw plenty like him. Perfect suits hiding perfect lies. I nodded thoughtfully. "I have a theory I want to test." The following week, during another meeting with Kevin, I deliberately mentioned incorrect figures about my assets. "The trust holds approximately $42 million after taxes," I said, knowing the actual figure was $36 million. "Excellent," he nodded. "And you mentioned a property portfolio?" "Just some land in Florida," I lied. "About $3 million worth." He made notes, smiling. "This gives me a clearer picture for planning purposes." 3 days later, I was sitting in Walter's room when Kevin called to discuss an exciting investment opportunity. I put the call on speaker. "Before we talk about that," I said, "did you discuss my portfolio with anyone else?" "Absolutely not," he assured me. "Client confidentiality is sacred in my business." Minutes after hanging up, my phone rang again. It was Michael Turner, the investigator. "Mrs. Washington, I followed Mr. Pearson as requested. He met with your son Marcus at Watershed Restaurant 20 minutes after speaking with you. I managed to get a table nearby and recorded their conversation." That evening, Walter, Ruby, Gina, and I gathered to listen to the recording. Kevin's voice came through clearly. "She's got even more than we thought. $42 million in the trust, plus Florida properties worth another 3. Marcus's response: "Perfect. Keep gaining her trust. Once we have control of the accounts, we'll start small. Management fees, consulting charges. She'll never notice." Ruby gasped. Gina crossed herself. Walter's face hardened into the expression that had once intimidated racist judges. "My own son," I said, voice hollow, "planning to steal from me." "What will you do?" Ruby asked softly. I squared my shoulders. "Keep playing along. See how deep this rabbit hole goes." But even as I said it, I wondered, was this just the beginning? What other betrayals were waiting to be uncovered? November brought crisp air, falling leaves, and the slow unraveling of my children's schemes. Michael Turner's investigation had expanded, revealing layers of betrayal I never imagined possible. "Mrs. Washington," he said during one of our weekly meetings, "I've traced the connections between Kevin Pearson and your son Marcus. They've already set up an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Small transfers have begun. Test runs, I believe." I nodded, numb but unsurprised. "And the other matter?" Michael handed me a folder. These were taken over the past 3 weeks. Inside were photographs of Danielle and Richard, Marcus's husband, meeting at hotels, holding hands in secluded restaurants, kissing in a parked car. "How long?" I asked. "Based on electronic communications we've recovered, approximately 5 years." 5 years. While I was caring for Robert in his final days. While Marcus and Richard were supposedly happily married. While Danielle was building her perfect career and perfect image. "There's more," Michael continued reluctantly. "Your son James is facing a malpractice lawsuit. A patient died under his care last year when he performed surgery while intoxicated. He paid the family to keep quiet, but they're threatening to go public now." I closed my eyes, absorbing each blow. "And the plan regarding my will?" Based on intercepted communications, Danielle intended to manipulate the documents to make herself executor with broad powers. She and Richard planned to divert funds, then disappear, possibly to South America. The pieces fit together in a sickening puzzle. My children's renewed interest in me, the sudden family unity, the financial advisor, the joint living arrangement they'd proposed. "Thank you, Michael," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Continue monitoring, please." That night, I sat alone in my garden, watching the stars. How had I raised such strangers? Where had I gone wrong? "Can't sleep either?" Ruby's voice came from the doorway. "Too much on my mind." She eased herself into the chair beside me. "You gonna tell us what that investigator found?" I hesitated, then realized I needed to share this burden. When Walter and Gina joined us, I laid out everything. The financial scheme, the affair, James's cover-up. Silence followed my revelations. "These are not the children you raised," Walter finally said. "Something happened to them along the way." "Money," Gina said sadly. "Money change people. Make them forget where they come from." "What you gonna do now?" Ruby asked. Go to the police? I shook my head. They're still my children. I need to handle this my way. The next morning, I called Patricia. I need to change my plans, I explained. Set up something different. A foundation. A family foundation? She asked. Not exactly, I replied. I have something else in mind. Over the following weeks, I played my role perfectly. The trusting mother, the naive lottery winner. I signed the papers Kevin brought me, knowing Patricia had ensured they held no actual power. I listened to my children's suggestions about protecting my assets, aware of what they really intended. All the while, I was building my case, gathering evidence, preparing. December brought holiday decorations and an invitation to my children. I'd like to host Christmas Eve dinner, I told them. A proper family celebration. Of course, Mom, Danielle agreed immediately. We'll all be there. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the window, a woman transformed from the broken soul they'd abandoned in January. My eyes held a determination they hadn't seen yet. They coming for Christmas? Ruby asked, seeing my expression. Yes, I smiled, but it won't be the celebration they're expecting. The weeks before Christmas passed in a flurry of preparation, not just for the holiday, but for what I'd come to think of as the reckoning. Patricia worked tirelessly, ensuring every document was in order. Michael continued his surveillance, building an airtight case. Are you sure you want to do this on Christmas Eve? Shanice asked as we decorated the tree. That's pretty cold. They abandoned me in January and ignored me for months, I replied. Cold doesn't begin to cover what they deserve. Still, doubts crept in during quiet moments. These were my children. I'd carried them, nursed them, taught them to walk and talk and dream. How had we ended up here? One evening, Zoe and Tyler came to help with Christmas baking. Unlike their parents, my grandchildren's affection seemed genuine. They'd been visiting regularly, forming real relationships with me and my housemates. Grandma, why didn't we see you all these years? Zoe asked as we rolled cookie dough. Dad always said you were too busy. The simple question cut deep. Adults sometimes tell stories that make them feel better about their choices, I answered carefully. But that's something you'll have to ask your father. Would my revelations destroy their relationship with their parents? Was that fair to them? I brought these concerns to my council, Walter, Ruby, and Gina, who'd become my true family. Truth is always fair, Walter said firmly. Those children deserve to know who raised them. Ruby nodded. It's gonna hurt them, no question, but lies hurt worse in the long run. You give them chance, Gina added. Their choice what they do after. The plan evolved. I would confront my children privately first, before the full family gathering. Give them one chance to come clean, to make amends on their own terms. On December 23rd, I invited each child separately to discuss holiday arrangements. Marcus arrived first, confident and charming as always. Marcus, I began after we were seated in my study. I know about the offshore account. I know about Kevin's role. I know everything. His face paled, then hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. I silently pushed forward a folder containing bank records, photos of meetings, transcripts of conversations. He thumbed through it, expression changing from denial to anger. You had me investigated? Your own son? You were planning to steal from me, I replied evenly. Your own mother. It wasn't stealing, he protested. It was asset management, protection. For who? He had no answer. Tomorrow night, you have a choice, I continued. Tell the truth to your family, or I will. And Marcus? I have much more evidence than what's in that folder. Danielle reacted with legal threats. James with tearful excuses about his addiction. Neither accepted responsibility. Neither apologized. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. My home looked magical. Lights twinkling, fire crackling, tables set beautifully. My friends had agreed to make themselves scarce during the family confrontation, though Walter insisted on staying nearby, just in case. My children arrived with their families, faces strained despite their festive attire. None had chosen to come clean in advance. After dinner, as we gathered in the living room, I stood before them all, children, spouses, grandchildren. Before we exchange gifts, I want to share a story, I began, about a woman who gave everything for her family, only to be abandoned when she needed them most. The room grew still as I recounted my journey, from the stroke to Magnolia Gardens, to the lottery, to my discoveries. I revealed Marcus and Kevin's financial scheme, Danielle and Richard's affair, James's medical malpractice. You didn't abandon me because you were busy, I concluded. You abandoned me because I had no value to you anymore. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Zoe's quiet sobs and Tyler's shocked, "Dad, is this true?" What happened next was both exactly what I'd expected and nothing I could have prepared for. My carefully orchestrated moment of justice dissolved into chaos. Accusations flew between siblings, spouses turned on each other, grandchildren looked on in horror. Marcus stormed out, threatening lawsuits. Danielle broke down in tears. James simply sat, head in hands. In the midst of the implosion, I felt strangely calm. The truth was finally out. Whatever happened next would happen in the light, not the shadow. 1 year passed. January 2026 found me standing in the renovated lobby of what used to be Magnolia Gardens, now renamed Second Chance Senior Living. The peeling paint had been replaced, the worn furniture upgraded, the staff doubled and properly trained. "Ms. Washington, the board is ready for you," said the new administrator, leading me to the conference room where the first meeting of the Second Chance Foundation was about to begin. Ruby sat at the table, now our resident consultant. Walter and Gina, whose friendship had blossomed into a late-life romance, were reviewing legal documents together. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Ruby commented, as I took my seat at the head of the table. "Hard to believe any of this," I agreed. The year following my Christmas Eve revelation had been tumultuous but transformative. Marcus had indeed attempted legal action, only to back down when faced with the evidence Patricia had accumulated. He'd lost his company when investigations revealed other financial improprieties, and now worked at a much-reduced position in another firm. Danielle and Richard's affair had imploded spectacularly under scrutiny. Both divorced their spouses, but their relationship crumbled under the weight of public exposure and mutual recrimination. James had surprised me. After initially disappearing for weeks, he'd returned sober, humble, and genuinely remorseful. "I hit bottom," he'd explained, "and realized I was turning into someone I never wanted to be." He was the only one of my children I still saw regularly. He'd accepted a position with the medical division of my foundation, working to improve health care for underserved elderly patients. His recovery was a work in progress, but his efforts seemed sincere. The foundation itself had become my legacy, not just renovating Magnolia Gardens, but establishing programs to help families care for elderly relatives at home, funding research into elder care alternatives, and offering scholarships to students pursuing careers in geriatric care. Some of my grandchildren had remained in my life, particularly Zoe and Tyler, who spent weekends and holidays at my home. Through them, I maintained a tenuous connection to the family I'd once had. "Mrs. Washington," the meeting was about to begin. "Would you like to open with a few words?" I looked around the table at my chosen family, Ruby with her quiet dignity, Walter with his sharp mind, Gina with her warm heart, Shanice with her compassionate care, and even James, working to redeem himself one day at a time. "A year ago, I was abandoned in this very building," I began, "left to disappear by the people who should have cared most. I thought that was the end of my story." Ruby reached over and squeezed my hand. "Instead, it was a beginning. I found a new family, one built on choice rather than obligation. Together, we're creating something that will outlast all of us." After the meeting, I visited Robert's grave, something I did each month. Ruby, Walter, and Gina waited respectfully nearby while I placed fresh flowers against his headstone. "You were right, love," I said softly. "You always said family isn't just blood, it's who shows up when you need them most." Standing there, surrounded by people who had chosen to love me when I had nothing to offer but myself, I finally understood what Robert had meant. Family wasn't just who you were born to or who you gave birth to. Family was who stood by you in your darkest moments. "We're going to help so many people, Robert," I promised. "People like me, who thought they were forgotten." As I turned to rejoin my friends, I caught sight of a figure watching from a distance. Marcus, looking older and somehow diminished. Our eyes met briefly before he turned and walked away. I felt a momentary pang, but no regret. I had offered all my children the same choice: accountability and reconciliation or consequences. James had chosen the harder, braver path. Perhaps someday the others would too, but I wouldn't wait for them anymore. At 77, I'd finally learned that life was too precious to spend it looking backward. "Ready to go home?" Ruby called. Home. Not the house I'd shared with Robert, not the nursing home where I'd been abandoned, but the new home we'd created together, a place of second chances. More than ready, I replied, and stepped forward into the future I'd never expected but had somehow found. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your journey might inspire another queen.